So I recently read the book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self by Trueman. And so I thought I'd do a quick video on it, a book review on it. Actually, in all honesty, I read it. It's been several weeks ago now, and a good friend of mine said, hey, how come you didn't do a book review on Trueman's book? And so, Adam, here you go. But actually, to be honest with you, I didn't really know how to really deal with it on a book review, so I actually wasn't going to do one, but and encouraged to do so, and kind of the reason why is because it's I guess the first thing I'll say about the book is a very dense, rich book, and so I wasn't really sure, to kind of wrap my brain around it, what I'm going to say in a quick video of it. Especially, I just do these book reviews off the top of my head. I don't have notes or anything like that. Actually, I don't even have the book with me anymore because I borrowed it from another friend of mine, Pastor Tony Hicks. Let me borrow his. I already gave it back to him. But basically, what I wanted to say was, there's so much packed into the book. How do I kind of condense it down and explain sort of the big picture? But that's the first thing I'll say about it. It actually took me several weeks to read the book myself. And that's not kind of how I normally like to read books. That's just my personal reading style. I kind of like to start a book and finish it relatively quickly in a matter of days, so that, I don't know, it just helps me to retain everything instead of spreading it out over a long period of time. But with this book, it was several weeks. I can't remember how long it took me. I don't keep a journal of my reading schedule or anything, but it took me a while because I'd do some reading and kind of wear you out. I'm like, this is not an easy reading a book that you're going to just read sitting out by the pool on vacation or something like that. This is one you got to really think about. You got to pay attention to. It's an academic book, a lot of footnotes. He's dealing with some important issues, and just his writing style. Trueman's writing style is just very dense, I would call it. He's written several other books. I don't think I've ever read anything else by Trueman. I used to listen to his podcast, which was very interesting, but I guess they're still doing that. But he does have a book on Luther. I bet you it's on Martin Luther, which I bet would be really good. But I've never read anything else by him. But his writing style is very dense. Maybe I'll give you an example of that in just a minute. But big picture, what the book is about is the modern self. The title is The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. I think the subtitle is something like Cultural Amnesia, Expressive Individualism, and The Road to Sexual Revolution. And so he's primarily dealing with the self. Many people might have said it's about transgenderism, which he does deal with transgenderism throughout the book, but that's really not what the book's about. Let me see if I can explain what I mean. It's more about the platform on which transgenderism makes sense in our culture. He kind of answers the question at the beginning of the book in the introduction. He kind of deals with, how do we get in our culture, Caitlyn Jenner? How did the culture get to a place where a statement like, I'm a woman trapped in a man's body makes sense? That's sort of where he begins the investigation. I think he mentions his grandfather who died, I think he said in the 90s or something. He said, if I just told my grandfather, or somebody would have said that to my grandfather in his generation, I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, he said his grandfather would have laughed. He would have said, that's nonsense. He would have said, is that a joke? What's the punchline? I mean, what's going on? Which reminds me of a actual joke that a similar, where a guy said, have you heard this one? A guy saying, at one time I was a man trapped in a woman's body. Actually, I heard John MacArthur tell this joke. John MacArthur said, I was a man trapped in a woman's body for 9 months, and then I was born. So anyway, other previous generations, that kind of concept would not make sense. But culturally today, you talk to just an average person. This is mythological African average person on the street. they accept that kind of thing. So how did we get there? So he deals with that, and he said he wasn't trying to do a polemic or a lament, instead just an explanation of how did we get here. Because all of it, actually, all of the concept of the modern self is not necessarily bad. There's some individuality that we ought to, think through. And so he deals with, the psalmists and the Apostle Paul and Augustine, as sort of some of the streams into this. But of course, things get out of whack very quickly. And especially he deals a lot with Marx, Freud, and Darwin, and those thoughts and how those ideas from those three individuals kind of come together along with others. He deals with Rousseau, and I think he mentions Derrida, Nietzsche, of course, even the British romantics like Wordsworth and Coleridge and Percy Shelley, those kinds of ideas that were popular in that time period, as well as in a more modern age, Hugh Hefner and hedonism and all the rest. And so what Trueman does is he kind of takes all of those things and walks us through how these concepts came together to come to the place where the modern self and its individuality is paramount above all else. And so that someone can actually say, declare themselves as a gender different than what they were born with. And so it's a very interesting book. Like I said, it's very academic. It is one that I think that people will have to be dealing with for a long time. And when I said it was dense, I said I was going to come back to this. I mentioned at the beginning of the book, he said it's not a polemic or a lament. At the end of the book, the last chapter, I think it's in the last chapter, he says, not that there's anything wrong with that necessarily. There's a place for Christians to use polemics and to argue against certain things and to lament the current state that we're in. That's just not what he was trying to do. However, he does mention that when we do that, oftentimes we run the risk of just being more therapeutic than prophetic. You see what he's saying? Basically, I think what he was trying to get at is, you can preach against something and really not do anything and just feel better about yourself because you preached against it. And he deals with that in one paragraph. He deals with that. That kind of weighty concept was in one paragraph. The next paragraph, another equally weighty concept. And the next paragraph, an equally weighty concept. You see what I'm saying? Just this book, it was dense. Very good, very interesting. I enjoyed reading it. At the beginning, when I first started reading it, and it looked like he was going toward all this transgender thing, I almost put it down because, just to be honest, I wasn't really interested in going through a long book about transgenderism. That just didn't appeal to me. But then I realized he's dealing with something much deeper than just that surface thing of transgenderism. And then it mentions that in the last chapter that he could have dealt with other issues like entertainment or architecture or other things. But instead he traced this one out. Just a fascinating book. I do recommend it. I would recommend it to pastors, especially who are dealing with these type of things, to understand it. It's probably a book that I would not recommend to everybody. And I struggle with saying this because I don't want to sound like I'm being arrogant or anything. But if you're not an avid reader, this probably isn't a book that you're going to want to trudge through. Like I said, it's an intense book. But I would recommend it if you wanted to. And I did mention this to my friend Adam, that sometimes people who like to just read parts of books. I'm not like that. I can't stand doing that. I got to read everything. I even read the foreword, the acknowledgments, the back cover. I like reading other people's book reviews. Even sometimes before I read the book, I go through the table of contents before I start reading the book, and so I can kind of understand the roadmap of where it's going. But But if somebody wants to read just the first chapter or the introduction and then the last chapter, I think he calls it the prologue, those two things, you kind of get the big picture idea that he's dealing with, and that would be very helpful in and of itself. And then if you want to go back and read the rest of it, it would be very good. So, great book. Recommend it. I'll go ahead and cut this video at this point because you need to get off of YouTube and go read a book. And if you want to read a book, read Carl Trueman's The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self.